Good afternoon, everybody. So welcome to our research symposium. This is a really exciting afternoon for all of us at the graduate school. I'd like to thank all the graduate school staff for really putting this event together. And now I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker. I have an incredible honor of introducing a colleague, a mentor, a friend of mine who has been an incredible advocate, not only for myself, but for early career scholars across the country. I won't go through her CV and all she's done and all of her accomplishments over the years, because quite frankly, then you all wouldn't get to present, because we'd be here for several hours. But very briefly, she has been at a number of institutions, including Northeastern University, for example. She was at University of Southern California, she's at FIU, she's had a number of significant roles in these institutions. She was the founding institute director. She was the inaugural director of the Institute for Urban Health Research and Practice. Later that was added. She has served as associate provost at the Bouvet College of Health Sciences at Northeastern University. She has served as associate provost. Her work focuses on developing clinical prevention and treatment interventions for substance abuse treatment. And her work has had an incredible impact that has really touched thousands and thousands and thousands of lives. She has also played a key role, and I'm sure she will probably say this at some point during her presentation, in helping to develop clinical services for those that are engaged in substance abuse. Apart from that, she has received a number of different lifetime career awards, not only for her research and for the impact of her work, but also because of her phenomenal mentoring with underrepresented minorities and early career scholars in general. Awards are from, for example, for the American Psychological Association. Particularly noteworthy is her election to the National Academy of Medicine a little over 10 years ago for her work in this particular area of substance abuse treatment and HIV. With that said, I also just want to spend one more minute, and I know you didn't come here to hear me speak, but this is someone who I have admired for a long time. I always talk about the importance of having really wonderful mentors in your life, and I'm not talking about just your dissertation chair or your thesis committee chair or the PI or director of your research lab, because Dr. Amaro she wasn't my lab PI, or she wasn't my direct supervisor when I was getting my PhD, but nonetheless, she has served as an important role, or more important role, than any other mentor I've had, because she has opened a lot of doors for me and has advocated for me and for other early career scholars over her career. And I met her, I'm just going to briefly say this, at the National Hispanic Science Network meeting when I was a student. And she came up to me, we started a little bit about respective work, and then all of a sudden the music starts. And we went out for a dance. So it really started with a dance. Literally. And since that time, it's important, like every relationship, to nourish relationships, and they have to be both-sided. And I think we have done that, very well. And I'll just end by saying that, Hortensia, you're somebody who I admire tremendously. And when I think of what it is to be a mentor and the type of mentor that I like to be, and hopefully that I am already for some of my early career scholars, that I am exactly the way you are, because I really couldn't think of a better mentor. So with that said, please help me welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Hortensia Amaro.
Thank you, Willie. Those words mean a lot to me, because the most satisfying thing for a mentor is to see their students do better than they did. And Willie certainly has done that. And so fast in his career. So those of you who have him as a mentor are really, really lucky. So today I want to talk about a topic that I think regardless of your discipline, your area of research, because I look through the presentations and I see the incredible creativity in different disciplines that you're doing work. I was really impressed. But that we all face, whether we're researchers or not. And this is really about what we'll call forks in the road. These are decision points that could be about your research, could be about your professional life, could be about your personal life. I'll focus mostly on kind of career and work-related forks in the road. Whatever our age, career stage, area of expertise, position, we face these over and over again throughout our lives, not just now. I know you're probably focused on the ones that you've just had to decide on that are coming up, but we'll continue to face these. So these are consequential decisions that we make that really end up shaping our life. And so it's really important to think about, let's see if I do this correctly. It's really important to take time to think about how will I make those decisions, or how have I made these decisions. Now, I just want you to raise your hand in the last year, or maybe right now, or in the near future, you're going to be coming to a fork in the road. It could be about work, could be about personal life. Maybe you're deciding if you'll get married, or you'll have children, or if you'll, if you'll take this postdoc or that postdoc, okay. Or if you'll get divorced, or leave your mentor because you're not getting what you need. All those things are forks in the road. So if you looked around, you see that most of us, and I could have raised my hand many times on that one, really are in the same situation. So it's important to turn to your peers and recognize that you are, probably people around you are also facing forks in the road, and be able to talk about what are those forks in the roads? What are the decisions, and how are you going about considering the different directions and options? So sometimes it looks like that road, this way or that way. Sometimes it feels like this. It's much more confusing. Maybe there are a lot of options, or there are options that really have consequences then for other options later down the line. So it's not always very straightforward. So it's important to create a space to navigate, to navigate, explore, and discuss these kind of choices and decisions. But we have few opportunities when you think about it, and spaces where we normally discuss these things, maybe with your mentor. Sometimes mentors don't necessarily go into things like this, or they may say, well, make a list of the pros and cons, right? How many people have not made a list of the pros and cons? But the list of pros and cons I've discovered isn't that helpful in the end, because there's sort of like another dimension, and that's really needed, another level of analysis. So, and this has to do with what principles and criteria do we employ in making decisions about our research, about our jobs, about our personal lives. Do we let the heart lead us, or do we let the head guide us? So this is something to really think about, because it will tell you something about how you've made decisions before. So this is a question that many people have pondered, what to do at the fork in the road. And so, Alice in Wonderland story, there's this part where Alice came to a fork in the road and wondered, which road do I take? And she asked the cat that was sitting on a tree, And so the cat said, well, where do you want to go? And she said, I don't know. The cat said, then it doesn't matter. So we don't know where we're going. That's an important thing to understand about yourself. Kissinger, Henry Kissinger, who many of you will know, he was United States Secretary of State and National Security Advisor under 2 presidents, Nixon and Ford. And he won the Nobel Peace Prize with Le-Duc d'O for jointly having a negotiated ceasefire in Vietnam. Anyway, he said, if you do not know where you are going, every road will get you nowhere. So knowing where we're going, our direction, our goals is really important. And as scientists have written books, this idea of, forks in the road is that lots of people have written about it, but there are scientists who have written about their trajectories and how they've been influenced by historical events they lived through. There are even love songs by Smokey Robinson about fork in the road, and another one by Visa that says, slow down, there's a fork in the road. So even in music, we see this theme. And then there's other perspectives. Robert Frost, the American poet, said, this is part of a longer poem, but 2 roads diverged in the wood, and I took the one less traveled by. And that has made all the difference. Another perspective. And then my favorite, really, is the Spanish poet Antonio Machado. I'll read it in Spanish and then in English. And it's, again, part of a stanza, it's part of a longer poem. Caminante son tus huellas, el camino y nada más. Caminante, no hay camino, se hace camino al andar. Traveler, your footprints are the only road, nothing else. Traveler, there is no road. You make your own path as you walk. So there's another perspective about creating your own path, not always having to take choice A or B that somebody's laid out for you. I certainly, in my career, had to make lemonade out of lemons many times because I got out of my PhD when there really it was a huge economic downturn during the early Reagan years, and there were no jobs for academics. Oh, let's turn it off, sorry. So creating your own path is also an option. So I think, you've read sort of guidance that other people, I've shared with you some guidance, other people's thoughts about what to do at forks in the road. Well, I say create your own guidance, because that would really require that you kind of explore what criteria you want to use for yourself. So I came up with one. In preparing the talk, I said, okay, well, let me see, what would I come up with? When facing a fork on the road, choose the path. Or better, create a new path based on your inspirations and that resonates with your life's purpose, goals, and aspirations. Because really, if you choose a path that doesn't have these things, think about what that will mean for your life, for your happiness, for your sense of accomplishment, and your sense of purpose. So life purpose is not, or aspiration, it's not about a job or a position or a title. It's not about getting married or not getting married. It's really much larger than that. Think of it as the aspiration of what and who and how you want to be in the world. In the big picture, what is the contribution you want to make in your life or in your work? So first, it's important to understand what people, events, or intellectual influences have deeply impacted you and motivated you to do the work you're doing or to be where you are now? How have those people and events informed your passions, the meaning, things that are meaningful to you, things that you want to contribute? Then seek to understand how these inspirations, these events, people that have inspired you, have shaped your aspirations, the things how you see yourself contributing in the future, who you want to be in the world, your life's larger purpose. These elements are really the compass to which that will help you when you need to make decisions, because they will help you keep yourself aligned with these very important central elements in life. So one, create your own guidance. Okay, what was my aspiration and decisions at forks in the road? Just a few very abbreviated examples. So really somehow early on I felt like, even when I was a kid, that I felt like I wanted to do something that made a difference. And it made a difference in a specific way. I wanted to do something that helped to address sort of things that I saw that were unfair or inequitable, just as a little girl growing up in Cuba and then as a refugee here. And as time went on, that became to make a difference via research on conditions that jeopardize the lives of marginalized people, populations, communities, and then translating, not just writing the articles, but then translating, doing something to translate that to programs, to policies, to services that actually reach people. And there were some forks in the road where I had to decide whether I was going to do that or not, because it was not the traditional academic role. And I was discouraged a lot from doing these things. So first I had to decide to conduct research I decided to conduct research that was community-based at a time when that term didn't exist, when the word inequities didn't exist in the research world. But I was advised that it was not important or even feasible. And that after all, Hispanics were such a tiny portion of the population. I was living in Massachusetts, in Boston, the Ivy League world. And so that was the perspective of the people around me. But I decided to not take their advice and to do that kind of research, and in a minute you'll see a little bit of that. I decided that I would create community-based organizations, community-based capacity and partnerships, because this is what people in the community needed. And that I felt that with knowledge from research, we could really inform, and I could use my standing in the community to do that. Translating research to practice by developing very long-standing programs in the community. So not just a research project that would go away, but after I had done the research, then how do I turn this into a program that is funded by the city, by the state, that can get reimbursement, etc., that's needed, that then is taken over by an agency or the city health department or someone else. And then I also decided to work on policies to address social determinants of health and health inequities. So remember now, this is all very promoted in public health, we should make our research relevant. But back then, what I was told was basically, it's not your job to do any of this. Your job is to do the studies, publish the data, and let somebody else do the translation and the development of programs. I also created national Latino professional organizations and took on leadership role in some of the mainstream professional organizations because I felt that this gave me sort of a voice that could help to educate other people, open doors for others, and bring visibility to the issues that I cared about. So one of the things that really became important to me, here's just one example, is using research to develop HIV prevention interventions for women who are sex workers, injection drug users, and partners of male injection drug users, and that was a MOS project. We finished that research project funded by NIDA, and I said, well, what we're going to do now? Well, what really was needed was development of a clinic to treat substance abuse and trauma, because these women, really, HIV was number 20 on their list. Number 1 was that they were living under a bridge, and that they were being abused almost on a daily level because they were on the streets. They were concerned that their kids were going to be taken away, etc. So we did that, and I formed partnerships with key leaders in the community and mentors. Here in that photo is Rita Nieves, who was an early colleague in this effort. Frida is a nurse, she's Puerto Rican. She also had a clinical degree in social work and public health. And so together, we developed these programs which still exist over 35 years later in Boston. We developed community partnerships. We had people like the Drug Czar take notice of our programs and come visit. We had the Surgeon General, Richard Carmona, the same thing. We had every year great events at the Boston Senate and House with legislators to talk about policy needs and train women in recovery and their children to advocate on their own behalf for funding, better funding in these areas. So I wasn't supposed to be doing that as an academic, and so I got a lot of heat and questions from especially my chair, etc. But as you'll see in the end, I was right and they were wrong. At least for me. So, number 2, lead when you're at the fork in the road. Lead with your inspirations, aspirations, passion, and life goals. Write about these. What are these for you? So, I said a little bit before that our aspirations are shaped and influenced by people, situations, or conditions that have inspired us to the very things that make us uniquely who we are, right? So those people, situations, maybe it was your abuelita who brought you up. Maybe it was, leaders of, historical leaders in your community who fought for rights that you now enjoy. Maybe it was the women in your community that ensured that girls could get an education. Maybe it was a famous scientist whose work you now rely on. Okay, so these are the people who came before you. I want everybody to turn around and just look back at that wall. If you look back, you will see a whole mountain of people, right? All the people who came before you in history, who really is why you're here today. It's not just you. You have put a lot of effort, absolutely, but it's not just you. So if you look at that, you are connected to that. Okay, you are part of that history. So these are things that if you learn more and more about them, you will realize they really did influence you. Or sometimes they influenced you and you didn't know why you were a certain way, but then you read about your own community's history and you realize, oh, that's how I was taught when I was growing up. Okay, so really understanding the sources of these inspirations that then inform your aspirations. So it really requires understanding the shoulders of people we stand on and what they gave, what they sacrificed, how they created possibilities so you could be here. So what does that require? Introspection, study, really gaining an understanding of this interconnection of ourselves to that history and to this larger social context. You know, along the road, I certainly had people who told me, no es importante, it's not important. Nunca, never, jamás, ever. No puedes, you can't. So learn what you can from them. Don't burn bridges. But put those comments and people in a parking lot far away. They're part of your history, but you're not going to give them a lot of attention because they really suck your energy. In my case, like I said, those people were wrong. They didn't really get me. They did not see or appreciate my unique experience, my skills, my passion, where I had come from. They knew nothing about that. I grew up in LA. I didn't grow up in Miami, where there were a lot of Cuban people. And it was because they didn't understand how I envisioned being an academic. Why? Because it was not in their image. So sometimes, you know, when you're getting advice, you have to remember whether the person is really giving you advice based on who you are or based on an image they have that they want you to be that has to do with them. So this takes some discernment, right? So seek out mentors, role models, peers who encourage you and help to nourish this sense of connection, history, your aspirations, your dreams, your passion. So I'm going to share now a little bit about a big fork in the road, a couple of big fork in the road moments and how I understand they evolved from the historical and social context in which I grew up, the resulting sort of compass or North Star that guided many of my decisions. This, if I had to say one, this is it. Oh. Oh. Okay, I think it comes next. Oh, yes, okay. So the question of Nena is my nickname in my family. And so there I am with my brother in Cuba before we came. Here I am, like as a teenager, you know, that awkward stage where your body feels like it doesn't belong to you. And finally, you know, the year I was inducted in 2010 to National Academy of Medicine. And so, you know, what did that look like? A lot of times people only see the end, like of a professor's life or some, you know, a scientist. Otherwise, I can't see that well. Okay, thank you. And so people don't know, like, well, how did you get there? Okay, this is how I got there. By the way, that's not me. I just don't have a picture of me in a red bicycle. But because if you look at the grass, there's no grass like that in Cuba, right? People, that's not what people's front yards look like, at least in my house. But this is a red bicycle that changed my life at age 8. So here, what I want to highlight, and this is from a chapter I wrote for a book, and the chapter is called Head Over Heart, and it's a book called Latina Psychologists Thriving in the Cultural Borderlands. So, but the question here is, which critical events help you to discover your own direction, your own voice, and your own sense of agency? Because there's a moment in childhood or maybe adolescence where we kind of we come, you know, to understand this, that we have our own sense of agency. And so maybe there's a time to remember. For me, it was the red bicycle. So I'm going to read you an excerpt from the chapter. It's not all of the part on the red bicycle because it's quite a story, but here it is. My 1958 epiphany was particularly rewarding. You know, Epiphany, Dia de los Reyes, right? Everybody know? Okay. That journey, Los Reyes, i.e. my parents, brought me a girl's red Schwinn bicycle. Oh, how I love that bicicleta roja. It's bright, candy, apple red color stood out and made me feel so special. Papi taught me how to ride it, and once I'd mastered that, I wanted to go everywhere and see everything. But I was a girl. I was not to stray past our street, ever. Our house was 3 houses away from a dirt road line with ramshackle dwellings. No well-brought-up white Catholic, I'm a way girl, had ever had any business wandering over there. And yet, I yearned to see what lay beyond. One Saturday in spring, when the weather is especially warm and not humid, kind of like Miami, we were eating our typical and my favorite breakfast. I sipped my sugary café con leche and dragged a torn chunk of freshly baked Cuban bread across the big plate of warm olive oil and garlic. That's when it came to me. I knew what I must do. The story goes on about what happened. But here are 2 kind of sentences at the end that says kind of what it meant to me. It was not lack of fear or disregard for how I was expected to behave that propelled me, but rather the thrill of exploration and self-determination. I would not allow fear to keep me from a path to discovery. It was the most thrilling day of my Cuban life. That bike ride and its psychological complexities would prove emblematic of the journey ahead. So when I think about taking risks, and where did I learn to take risks, not crazy risks. I remembered my red bicycle because it was something forbidden. That situation helped me question rules that made no sense and that limited my sense of agency. Okay, so find out what those critical events were for you. For me, really important critical events growing up had to do with historical period in which I grew up. The civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, Chicano movement, Black Panthers and the New York Puerto Rican Wars, LGBT movement sparked by the Stonewall riots, Native American rights movements, and in South Africa, anti-apartheid movement led by Nelson Mandela and others. So this was really, for people in my generation, part of our everyday life. It was a time when young men burned their draft cards and women burned their bras. It was a time of questioning gender expectations, and the pill was huge. That you could actually take something, not fear getting pregnant. That was huge for women. And sexual liberation. Television news broadcasts were filled with chilling images of police beatings, handcuffing, and sometimes killing people, marching peacefully for equal rights. That sounds familiar. And students protesting the war at Kent State. Some were killed and injured. I felt at that time, as a student at UCLA, that I needed to be part of change, and that, like many in my generation, sometimes I wonder if it would likely come from knowledge or through armed struggle. I did wonder about that as a student. But during many nights of studying in my cubicle as a graduate student, I decided that knowledge was the best weapon to bring about change, that an informed voice with data can make a contribution to combat justice, stigma, discrimination, and suffering. So these were historical events. This is me and my family right before we came. There were a couple of other events that then informed my research. And the first was the death of Rosario Jimenez. She was a 27-year-old Chicana in McAllen, Texas, a college student. And she died from a legal abortion. And the CDC did an investigation, concluded that it was due to her cultural beliefs, that she did not go get a legal abortion from a doctor. And then I read a book called Rosie, the Investigation of a Wrongful Death, written by 2 CDC investigators, researchers, who actually noted that it was not her cultural background, that it was her lack of access to Medicaid, because the Hyde Amendment had been passed by Congress, which limited certain reproductive services to low-income women. And that's true to this day. And so at the time, little was known about the reproductive attitudes and experiences of Mexican-American women. I chose to do my dissertation on this topic of reproductive rights and reproductive attitudes and experiences and their connection to culture, religion, etc. I subsequently published that paper, but it was an unusual research topic because at the time at UCLA, students either their dissertations were either based on undergraduates or grads. So rarely in real communities. So, you know, a lot of research in psychology back then was undergraduate student volunteers, or you were doing animal studies, it was grads. But nobody went out to East LA to clinics to talk to women. A second major historical event that shaped my work was the AIDS epidemic. AIDS changed everything. Everything. I was conducting at the time a study of women's drug use at Boston City Hospital. I had a job there as an assistant professor. And one of the participants, I'll call Mary, was in the postpartum ward because we were interviewing women prenatally and then postpartum. And she was an African-American woman who looked way older than her 27 years. She had been, she was an injection drug user and sex worker, and she had just been told she was HIV positive. So if you know anything about the AIDS epidemic back then, you know, that meant it was a death sentence. She was waiting to find out if her baby was infected, and back then, that meant waiting weeks to find out. So I sat there and I talked to her, and Mary's story impacted me so much that it shook me, and I said, what am I doing? What am I doing collecting all this data? This is just going to end up in a research article in some bookshelf, and like, how is it going to help people like Mary? And that really bothered me. It bothered me, and it was quite disturbing. And when I was thinking through that, then tragedy knocked on my door. A few months later, my 27-year-old brother, Armando, who I had practically raised since my family's arrival here, was diagnosed with AIDS. This was when there was no ACT, no nothing. They didn't know. They were just finding out. It was just being called AIDS. So you can imagine the impact that had. This became a national crisis. Obviously, there were weekly funerals of friends, family members, leaders in the Latino community. So AIDS changed everything, including my family and my career. So, you know, I subsequently went on to do HIV research. I subsequently went on to devote a lot of time to do community organizing, developing community organizations to address issues of AIDS, to speak nationally on this issue. It just really took over the work. It felt so compelling. There were other historical events also and demographic shifts that informed my work. And so I encourage you here, number 4, write your personal inventory of what major historical factors and other kinds of factors inform or continue to inform forks in the road about your research, decisions you've made about going one direction or another. So here are just a few quickly that inform my work. First, drug policies in the US. which I won't go into specifically here, but that basically resulted in this. In huge incarceration of entire populations, particularly African American and Latino men, differential enforcement of these policies across different communities, deepening race and ethnic inequities in the rates of incarceration for Black and Latino men and women, and then in the face of lack of efficacious treatment for these populations. So, huge problem, especially when you look at the fact that during that time we were becoming more aware of the demographic shift that was occurring and that we now see. Which is that Latinos, of course, now are the largest minority group in the U.S. By, 2040, 2050, between there. The U.S. will be a white minority country. This has important implications for how looking at how adequate is the knowledge base in the issues that I work in for addressing that future demographic. It's highly, highly inadequate. And so there's a very important role for research. Even today, this went up to 2017 when you look at articles related to Latino substance use or substance use disorder, there's still, relatively few compared to the literature, the larger literature on this. So, and this is true for other minority groups as well. So there's a huge need for scientific research in this area. So do this kind of analysis for your area of work and see these are the things that influence me and continue to motivate me to do the work I do and to train people who will do the next generation of work. Number 5, $sign I put. Number 5, create the historical time frame of what shaped your development and work. I'm so happy to hear that Willie has done this. But anyway, this is really informative, I just happened to do it for myself, starting when I was born, 1950 in Camagüey, Cuba, through the various key points of my professional career, publications, grants, social movements, things that really impacted my work, etc. And it might be useful for you to do it with your students or ask your students to do it. And of course, they'll be building it as they go. And then, in the end, 2020, all of that, I was elected to the National Academy of Medicine. I received 2 honorary degrees. I have over 50 major awards. I didn't go for these things. It was just because I pursued my passion and because I made decisions at the forks in the road that were meaningful to me. So I think it's important to really understand your own history, both individually in the context of the historical moments through which you lived, of your community, your heritage, your family. So, to summarize, create your own guidance on what to do at forks in the road. A statement, kind of like what I did. Number 2, write about your inspirations, aspirations, passions, and life goals. It's through writing them that you'll kind of discover them and be better able to articulate them, and that will provide you better guidance at forks in the road. Number 3, identify which critical events help you to discover your own direction, your own voice, your own sense of agency. I don't know for you, but for me, graduate school was I felt like it was like a brainwashing experience. Maybe graduate school has gotten better now. But why I felt that way is because it had nothing to do with me or people like me. If I had not had my own list, which I ended up developing in graduate school, my own readings of the authors that I felt could really help me to understand myself and my communities. If I hadn't had that, I would have thought that there was not a Latino in the U.S., not an African American, not a Native American, because none of the studies or theories we were reading and learning about had any of those populations. And my professors certainly weren't of any of those groups. And it's like UCLA at the time. It's a little bit better now, but not as much as it should be. But anyway, so it was important to have my own reference regarding knowledge also. Choose my own authors, not just, take responsibility for your education. It's not just about the syllabus and what you're required to read. It's about your intellectual curiosity and the things that, you may choose to read that somebody else doesn't know about. 3, 4, what factors have informed forks in the road about your research? So what are the things that really led you to do what you're doing now and what you did before that? And finally, create a historical timeframe line of events that shape your development and your work. And then remember, there will be many forks in the road. The answers to which direction to take, only you can answer. No mentor can tell you. A good mentor will not tell you what to do. A good mentor will help you explore what these different options mean for you. It takes work to be clear on what direction to go. Rely on your inspirations, aspirations, and life goals. But the most important thing that I want to leave you with is